Hi, I'm Ivan, and we're here at Zadar at Infobip Shift 2025. I'm here with Josip Antoliš. Josip, how are you?
Hi, good, enjoying the show.
Yeah, nice to hear that. Can you introduce yourself? What's your role at Infobip?
Yeah, sure. I'm Josip Antoliš. I'm senior principal engineer at Infobip, and it's kind of a mixed role. It's a technical role, so I work with teams, I work with code, I work with some ideas, maybe a little bit of strategy, and kind of try to contribute where I can.
Awesome. So at your lecture, you talked about crises that you faced at Infobip. So can you tell me something about those crises?
Yeah, they were kind of handpicked for the presentation to make sense, but sure. I tried to find some situations, some challenges we've had in Infobip in past that kind of influenced and shaped the way our infrastructure looks. So they were situations where we, for example, used some cloud and extended our on-premise data centers to cloud to kind of help us scale, help us handle bigger loads. Also some cases where we've had even some incidents and then we learned from them, and that's kind of my favorite part about incidents, coming up with improvements for the future. So how we re-architected our on-premise data centers, we even shifted our hypervisor technology, we migrated to VMware as a result of some experiences and some incidents.
Awesome. So 10 billion messages in a single day. How hard was it to infrastructure that? Did you face any challenges? I mean, of course you did, but can you tell your first-hand experience with that?
So for us, this is kind of in the higher level of peaks of traffic that we have. And those are usually for us during Black Friday, Cyber Monday days. That's when we get the highest load. And in fact, as infrastructure and as a company in general, we do prepare for these events in advance. So even right about now, we are starting our scaling, we are starting our tests. So we run huge load tests to prepare, make sure everything is ready. We have some redundancies as well. So in this case, the majority of traffic is coming from the US. And then there we have redundant data centers. And for some specific customers with high throughput and high load, we even have some third redundancy site that they can use. So we spread the traffic across a lot of data centers and we try to stay up to date, and so far we've succeeded in that. So I'm always proud of my team and how they deliver.
That's always nice to hear.
Yeah.
So out of all the hand-picked crises, as you said, what do you think? Which one had like the longest impact in you guys? Like, is there any crisis that you've been facing for years, or is it like the crisis happens and then you resolve it immediately and it's done?
Yeah.
Or it does not work like that?
Yeah, it kind of depends. There are some use cases that continue to evolve. So, you think of it, okay, I heard about the initial use case, I don't know, 4 years ago, but even to this day, we continue to iterate and we continue to refine and get feedback from our customers. So sometimes it really takes a long time. And other cases are stuff like incidents. We've had this one incident, which I called out during the presentation, from which we actually learned a lot. So with the incidents, they get resolved in a day, in an hour, maybe even shorter. But then you sit down and you look at what your infrastructure looks like, what your architecture looks like, and you come up with improvements, solutions for that, how to prevent things from happening again. And then implementing these can take a long time, depending on the scope. And the repercussions are felt even years down the line. When we do get the newer architecture, it's usually better.
Yeah.
So we reap the benefits for a long course.
Yeah. So how difficult was it to maintain a balance between on-prem and multiple cloud providers? Tell me about that.
That's actually a good question. And it's a balance that we feel in our infrastructure team, but we try to hide this complexity from our developers who rely on our infrastructure. So in our tooling, for example, we try to make tools agnostic. So the users of our tools, they see if some virtual machine, for example, is deployed to a cloud or to on-premise data center, but they don't feel this difference. And instead, our tooling itself picks and uses, for example, in this case, different cloud APIs. So in this case, we need to implement connections, and GCP, Google Cloud, was the latest addition to our kind of tool set, and we really needed to integrate and use these APIs which are specific for this cloud. So it's always like some work on our end, but we try to abstract it from the users. And then it's a question of choosing whether to use some technology or some tools in cloud, or actually trying to figure out and deploy and maintain them on premise. And oftentimes we start with a cloud solution just so that we can experiment and maybe initially scale more quickly. And then once our use cases are kind of more solid, when we understand what we need from the technology, we look into how we can maybe bring it to some on-premise data center without cloud support in some particular location, region, or something like that.
So when WhatsApp Business launched, you also talked about it in your lecture, you had to rethink scaling with Kubernetes, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell me about that experience?
Sure.
How did it impact you guys? And
yeah, so that's maybe one good example of this iteration cycle I mentioned. We first started and we tried to build Kubernetes clusters on premise, and we succeeded in that. But we learned a lot, and we figured out that some things are hard to maintain or scale, etc. So in that case, we looked at what was available from cloud providers, and in this case, Microsoft had their Azure Kubernetes service, which they were also starting with at the time. So we were one of the earlier customers of that, and we went through some growing pains with them on that product as well. But in the end, it really scaled nicely, and it's a good product. And then we learned a lot, and we started to recognize new and future use cases that we can solve with Kubernetes. And for those use cases, we figured out sometimes it's beneficial to have it on-premise, for example, in regions or data centers where there is no kind of nearby cloud that we can rely on. In these cases, it's useful to have it on-prem, so we kind of invested in that. We gathered the expertise, and slowly we built a kind of comparative service that we can self-host now.
I see. So in your lecture, you also talked about being skeptical about GitOps, right?
Yes.
Why is that so?
Yeah. So one of the examples I went through in the talk was that oftentimes we start with some configuration files, and in that case, that's kind of the origin story. We put that under Git, and that's where the name comes from, obviously. And that's a good idea. I still believe putting configuration under Git is a preferred way to go. However, then this configuration oftentimes grows in complexity. So we get some maybe domain-specific language around it, or we get some templating. It becomes complex. And our developers who are using this actually, it becomes hard for them to learn it. It becomes complex. So then we build some sort of UI sometimes, or some service which sits between the users and whatever the config is in these config files under Git. And then this service, it becomes kind of confusing to maintain and build because it doesn't have some solid API. The structure of config files is kind of leaking through the API. And it doesn't have some kind of nice database. It relies on these config files under Git. And developing new features, it becomes confusing. You don't know whether to put a new feature in this service between UI and config files, or do you put the new feature into the actual application which reads and applies these config files. So it becomes kind of split that way, and logic gets implemented here but not there, validation is messy, etc. So that's kind of the breaking point.
Did you guys implement agentic AI yet?
Yeah. That's also one of the kind of benefits that we've seen with building kind of nice APIs for our internal tooling, that agentic AI can easily lean onto these nice APIs, which then have all the same validation, authentication and authorization, etc., as any other like CLI or web UI has. So we kind of get benefits from that, and our AI agents can then lean on this, and we can use them to kind of interact with our infrastructure in a more chat-like manner. I can ask this agent to find some virtual machines, for example, compare them and kind of tweak them, maybe do some bulk actions on them, etc. So it's nice. The AI is very useful in kind of querying and comparing a lot of data and surfacing what's relevant, finding the relevant piece of information in a sea of data. That's where they are good at.
Nice. Thanks for sharing all those informations.
Yeah,
And
sure.
now to finish it up, are you enjoying Shift?
Yes,
Having
yes.
fun?
This year, for the first time, like for me, we've had a booth where I was kind of meeting people and having these conversations. So it was a lot of meeting and talking to people and hearing about their use cases and sharing ours as well. So
Awesome. That's real nice. Thank you, Josip.
Thank you.